Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for coming. Sorry to make you wait. Mr. Grayling has told us that he was delayed. His flight, he's coming from the UK. His flight was delayed, and we did our best to wait. But I don't want to penalize all those who came on time, and also all those who have to leave quite on time when the conference is finished, because two of our speakers have ulterior commitments tonight. So, as a good conference manager, I will improvise the order of speakers. That would be a bit different than the one we had envisaged, but let me first tell you that our main purpose is to contribute to the debate, to a rational debate, to a comprehensive debate where all point of views are represented. This is a very serious challenge for the EU at the moment where the EU is being challenged by a lot of other things. There is a meeting of heads of state and government currently going on in the city, as some of you might have noticed. So the European model was seen as a sort of beacon of light in a sea of darkness has dimmed a bit in the last few years and months because of the assault of the rest of the world. And although we would like the world to be different, we seem to have little grasp on how to change it. The way we thought, for instance, in the security strategy of 2003, that the transformative power of the EU would be irresistible. This has changed, and the threat is from without, is also from within, and it's not only the UK, because we don't want to single out the UK. There are problems everywhere in many member states. So again, I am happy to see that this has attracted a lot of people, and especially a lot of young people. I'm particularly pleased to see that as many young people, they are modest, they are in the back benches, not all of them, but they are there. And I also can greet some of the trainees of our diplomatic service who have thought that it would be educational for them to participate in this debate. Now, what I propose is, in waiting for Mr. Grayling to come and to make his presentation, to which Mr. Corbett could then react, I would ask the people I thought would come after to come first. And the first speaker I will call is Marc Tarabella, who is a member of the European Parliament, who has been very active on this dossier and others. I would ask speakers to limit their remarks to about 12-15 minutes so that we have enough time to hear what the audience has to say about this, that it becomes an interactive event rather than a series of speeches. So, Mr. Tarabella, what is the European perspective on the UK issue? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's an honor to be part of this debate with all of you. And I'm very pleased to come back in Palais d'Egmont. When I came very often in the past, at the beginning of my first term, when Palais d'Egmont organized meeting with young people from schools. And it's a big pleasure for me to come back here. Firstly, let me be frank with you. I'm fully aware EU 28 do not function efficiently today. We have a lot of backfalls, and we must resolve that. It's complicated to function with 28 countries with the same rules than before. And sometimes, and very often, a minority of countries block the mechanism of decision moreover, in the Council, the Commission is waiting for better regulation. They think, they do a less legislative proposal, and the Parliament is waiting for some proposal because the Commission has the initiative, is the law, and we respect the law, but we have so many challenges to face, and we are waiting for to work on legislative proposal. And the Council, as I said, is often blocked on some huge topic, and I will speak about that after. But I'm convinced also that we don't need more Europe à la carte, as today, but more a united Europe to face all new challenges that we will coming in the near future. I don't criticize the principle to organize a referendum, but what is the reason to organize such referendum? And of course, I think that in UK, allow me to have a special comment, because I will not vote on the 23rd of June as a Belgian citizen. But the Conservative Party, we have to admit that is very divided on this issue. And having said that, when the proposal came from Mr. Cameron, the Prime Minister is hoping to be re-elected. And indeed, he won the election with that promises. And now he has to respect the promises. And he's swimming in his own trap that he created for himself. It's my opinion, of course. I personally think that. He is holding the citizens as hostages of this proposal. And he has never, in the past, admitted that Europe has represented an added value for UK, for the UK economy, for example, and then for the UK citizens who are ignorant of that. And he obtained an agreement in the Council on the 20th February to defend himself, to remain in. I know that it's not since the 20th February 2016 that UK has a special status. I think that UK negotiated a special status since the beginning. And I give some examples as the British rebate obtained in 1984. But the British rebate, it's still existing. And now it's an amount at 5 billion euro per year, lack of income for the European budget. But not only the rebates, but also some opt-outs in some directive. I remember the directive on, for working time per week, for example. And frankly, I personally regret the position of all other leaders because for the first time, for example, they admitted that it will be a difference between European citizens working in UK. On the demand of Cameron, they abandoned a grid principle. I think it's a victory for Cameron, that, and a defeat for all European leaders. But what I would like to highlight today also, it's my view on the Mayor of London. And I'll be very frank on that also. Boris Johnson, since he is Mayor of London, should know better than remaining in the EU is to benefit for the UK economy in global, not only for the city, but also for SMEs, for the global economy on UK. His ultimate goal is to become the next leader of the Conservative Party, and even, maybe, to become Prime Minister of UK. It is a very irresponsible and selfish attitude of a pampered boy. We have to tackle old problems with new solutions. I'm convinced of that. Let me take some example to illustrate that it's better to face huge issues united than each in their own corner. For example, fighting against terrorism. We have to work hand in hand to collect data. And to collect data, we'll improve that with a PNR, okay, but it's not only sufficient. We have also to exchange the data and to work on it to face the terrorism. And we know the high level of efficiency of not only the British diplomacy, the UK diplomacy, but also the intelligence services. But it's important to work together, to work hand in hand, to work better in this direction to fight the terrorism, because it's terrible, and now also in Europe. And you know that, because London was victim of that attempt a long time ago, but also Madrid and now also Paris. The crisis of migrants also. We have paralyzed decisions. Some country, and also Slovakia, for example, Hungary, totally refused to accept to take a percentage of migrants or only Christian as in Slovakia. It's a shame, because the proposal coming from the Commission was great. Mr. Juncker, Mrs. Mogherini proposed to share and to share the task to have migrants in each country. And a few countries refused. And now we have today a council to try to resolve this problem. I don't know if they will succeed. And the agreement with Turkey, okay, we can discuss on that, but it's not the topic of the day. And this is not how we have to operate. Such attitude will get us nowhere. We have to share the same rules and ideas. For example, I listened to the Belgian radio this morning. I listened that Mr. George Osborne, the Chancellor of Exchequer, has intention to tax the big international company. And he is right, because workers, self-employed persons, SMEs pay taxes in our country, but multinationals don't pay taxes. It's not normal. And you want to face that? And I agree with him. And of course, on the rate of taxation, probably we have to keep a sovereignty, subsidiarity for the country. But on the principle, it would be better to work together in the 28 countries of Europe because we have to face the same problem in all countries. Why to do that alone, if in case of Brexit, without the other countries, that they have to face the same issue? And of course, we have a huge challenge to face. Decrease our dependence towards Russia and Arabic Peninsula for gas and fuel. Okay, the price is decreasing, but 3 years ago, the amount of the dependence of fuel and gas it's a cost of 500 billion euro per year for the European Union. It's necessary to face that and to diminish this dependence, and also for climate change reason. But also increase renewable energy. With a common European strategy, we need that. And UK has a key role to play, because UK is pushed forward this issue and is very in advance. And probably it would be better to work together, hand in hand, with some budget with UK in the European Union. Fighting terrorism, as I mentioned earlier, it's also a very important issue, big issue, in which we can work better together than alone in our own corner. Create jobs, especially for young people, because we have now a problem of growth rates, of course, and also to find, we have well-formed young people in the university, high school, but also in technical jobs, and no more jobs. We have to give hope to young people in Europe and to boost the economy. They are a huge challenge. And I think that, as conclusion, UK is a key actor with other in the European Union. And it's for that reason that today I'm still Euro favorable, not Euro skeptic, of course. But you have to change rules. It's my conclusion. We have to change rules to face more efficiently all big issues, because a lot of people are waiting for an efficient Europe, a more efficient Europe. You have to change, but not in the direction of a Europe à la carte. It's no solution with that. We have to define a new project for Europe, as François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl did in the past. We need probably leaders at this level to decide and to push forward a united Europe to face those challenges. We need that. People of Europe need that. And when I speak about people of Europe, I include, of course, people of UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for setting the scenes, which allowed us to now welcome Chris Grayling, who has kindly agreed to present the case for those who are in favour of leaving the European Union. Chris Grayling was appointed Lord President of the Council and Leader of the House of Commons in May 2015. And he was elected Conservative MP for Epsom and Ewell in 2001. He has a long and distinguished career in British politics and at the service of the state. And it's a pleasure now to hear, we're eager to hear what is your version of the facts. In the introduction, I said we wanted to participate in the general debate. This is just a contribution, and that we take no position on this, whether it's good or not, but I think what I said is that we wish to contribute to a rational debate about this, and to see all the point of views, those of the UK, of course, but all those of the other European governments. I'll give you the floor now for not too long, so we can also let the people that are here in the audience eager to hear you, but also eager to express an opinion. I also mentioned there are a lot of young people, and I think it's an encouraging sign that they want to be part of this debate. So, Chris Grayling, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Monsieur Otter, and very good to be here tonight. Thank you for inviting me. I want to start by saying I come here as a friend of Belgium and a friend of all of the member nations of the European Union. I'm looking forward to our countries working together for hundreds of years to come, as we have done in the past. But I believe that Britain can do that from outside the European Union. And what I want to do tonight is to explain why. And I may believe that Britain is better off leaving the European Union. I just emphasise, it does not mean I wish to see any enmity or bad feeling between all of our countries. So what I want to do is explain to you why I think we're better taking our different directions for the future, even though we should stay working closely together as friends and neighbours. I don't think we have to be, the United Kingdom has to be a member of the European Union for us all to be close friends and allies. We don't have to stop working together to meet international challenges if we are outside the European Union. We don't have to be members of the European Union to work together to protect all of our national security. We don't have to stop working together on international science programmes if Britain is outside the European Union. Remember, CERN, which we're all partners in, is based in Switzerland, not in the European Union. We should all aim to carry on as friends and allies, regardless of the choice that I believe the British people will make this summer. I think it's all about, to me, the direction that the European Union itself is taking. There is a very clear vision amongst leading members of the EU for its future, very well summed up by the Five Presidents' report last year, which set out a very clear path towards economic, financial, fiscal, and finally political union. Sharing more sovereignty, a stronger capacity to act collectively, that document talks about legal and institutional change. It's a goal that's been shared publicly by, among others, Wolfgang Schäuble, who's called for a directly elected president of the Commission, by the Italian finance minister who last summer argued for a common budget, a common unemployment insurance scheme, perhaps even an elected Eurozone parliament alongside the existing European Parliament and a Eurozone finance minister. And it's something that members of the European Parliament have been arguing also, is the path that the EU must follow. And what the Five Presidents' report does is it makes clear that work towards this much greater degree of integration must start straight away. They want the project to be complete within a decade. They've set out an ambitious programme for change, to say one that seems to have support across the Eurozone. Now, actually, I understand the renewed sense of urgency about the need to move towards closer union. I think we've learned that lesson in the last few years. It's never, in my view, been possible to build a successful economic and monetary union without a political dimension as well. I think the struggles of the Eurozone have underlined the need for harmonisation and much closer integration if those problems and challenges are not to be repeated if the Eurozone crisis is not to be repeated in the future. And we also know that every single EU country, with the exception of the United Kingdom and Denmark, is committed by treaty to joining the Eurozone, and so will also be obliged to move along this path towards political union. That was restated in the agreement that was reached in Brussels in February. So I think this vision of the European Union is inevitable. But as most of the EU moves towards political union, what about the United Kingdom? Where do we fit into things? We are not going to be joining our partners on the road to political union. We're not going to be joining the euro. We are not going to be joining the Schengen area. All that was very clearly set out in the agreement reached here in Brussels a month ago. And I say, our Prime Minister, the leaders of other member states, put in a huge amount of effort to reach an agreement, and I recognise the goodwill that exists for the United Kingdom across the European Union. It would be easy to say that this recognition of two different types of member state would be sufficient to address concerns in the United Kingdom. One group of members fully integrated into a Eurozone-based core, a small number opted out of key elements of the governance of that core. I don't think that works. I do not think this new world is one for us. If the vision of the five presidents is going to be achieved, by 2025, the map of the European Union is going to look very different. The political union of 26 nations will dominate the map. It will completely control the institutions of the EU. Indeed, frankly, if the vision of a different set of institutions for the Eurozone comes to pass, I'm not actually clear what the role of the current institutions is. If we have this parallel set of institutions, one for the Eurozone, one for the whole, I'm not actually sure what the role of the existing institutions is. And of course, that was a key matter of debate when the United Kingdom and Hungary declined to take part in a new EU agreement during the Eurozone crisis 5 years ago. Initially, the Council Legal Service said it would not be legal for an agreement between some member states to provide for a role by the existing institutions. It then changed its mind, and so we do still have a single set of European institutions. But it's very hard to see how those EU institutions that we have today could credibly be used as the heart of a political union and still be seen as fair, impartial and dispassionate by non-participating states. And if the current institutions are not to be replaced or sidelined, then inevitably their focus, the focus of the people who work in them, is going to be on the future and on the development of that political union. The national interest of one or two member states outside the political union will be of marginal importance. It's going to be like being a shareholder in a company where someone else holds 95% of the shares. Yeah, you may have a seat at the table, but your voice has little or no impact on the final decision making. And of course, that becomes a particularly acute problem when it becomes, when it's a matter of the Eurozone member states using single market provisions in the treaty to underpin a move towards greater integration. And that's been very clearly set out. The intention is to use single market legislation, single market provisions in the treaties as part of the move towards political union. So decisions taken by as many as 26 of the 28 current member states about the introduction of new legislation will inevitably be focused on their own needs and on the needs of that fledgling political union. It's just human nature. You look after your interests, you look after the goal that you are trying to achieve. Now, what we know is that all of those member states have felt able to concede in the negotiations that have just taken place is that the non-Euro states have a right to ask the Council for a second opinion, to think again. But to me, there are crucial questions that underpin my view that we are better accepting a different path. If the Commission, for example, brings forward a legislative proposal, for example, in the area of financial services, a proposal that is designed to help the move towards a full fiscal, economic, monetary and political union, if that proposal has the side effect of damaging employment or competitiveness in the United Kingdom, can we do anything about it? You all know the answer to that is no. We will be inevitably comprehensively outvoted. The Eurozone will dominate the institutions, it will dominate the votes, it will be taking decisions in the interests of the pursuit of a political union. That is human nature. Do we honestly think if those Eurozone member states need to take a step that is necessary for the process to political union to continue, do we honestly think that the impact on the United Kingdom is going to play a big role in decision-making? And that's the problem that we both share. The Eurozone member states need to progress rapidly towards political union. The needs of other member states, the 1 or 2 or 3, and it's going to be a very small number, that are not within that process are inevitably going to be of lesser importance. And I don't think I can argue to the citizens of my country that we should accept that lesser role, that inability ultimately to determine our own national interest, rather than leaving the European Union, taking a step away from that political union, its process, and following our own path. And look at it from the perspective of an elected politician in the United Kingdom. You know, would you, in our position, choose to join the EU on this basis for the first time? Would you accept that marginal role for your own country? Would you accept a position where a single large bloc of countries that have formed a political union could effectively dictate to you what happened in your own country? I just don't think you would do that. Now, there's obvious questions that arise if the United Kingdom does vote to leave, about trade, about free movement, about future cooperation in defence and security. And what you'll be seeing if you've been watching the debate in England, in the United Kingdom, is all kinds of rather over-the-top claims about the consequences of leaving. I think the truth is rather different. So let's start with trade. There are those who say it would not be possible for the UK to trade freely in Europe if we were to leave the European Union. They say that the tariffs would be too high between the EU and Britain, we wouldn't be able to agree new trade agreements. I think that is extraordinarily improbable. Millions of jobs around the EU depend on selling goods and products to UK consumers. We buy far more from other EU member states than they do from us. Does anybody seriously believe that French farmers will stand idly by while they're separated from their markets in the UK, or German car makers from their UK dealerships? And I can assure you today, a Britain outside of the EU would not seek to place tariffs on your markets, on your producers. I'd be very surprised if other member states want to do the same to us either. The truth is, if our trading relationships broke down, there would be economic consequences for all of us. And what's the logic in that? What's the point? We have a free trade area from Iceland to the Russian border of countries inside the European Union and outside the European Union. I don't think that's about to change. I don't think we're going to end up in a situation where we're at loggerheads with each other. There is no financial logic in that at all. On the issue of free movement, none of us want to see borders go up in a way that stops people taking up a job in a different European country. But we face a particular challenge with the scale of migration in the United Kingdom. As a landmass, we're significantly smaller than countries like France and Germany, yet we have comparable populations, or we're on the way to that. Now, our official forecasts show our population rising from 63 million to between 75 and 80 million in the years ahead. Yet we've already got, because we're a densely populated country, a housing crisis, not enough houses for our next generation, a shortage of school and hospital places, an infrastructure that needs to be expanded. I don't think we can absorb migration on that scale. And I think we need to have some control over the number of people who come and live and work in the United Kingdom. There's a whole variety of ways of doing that. You could simply say that if you're going to come, it used to be in the past like this, you just have to have a job before you come. You can't just get on a bus and come and look for a job in the United Kingdom. It's a whole variety of different ways to do it. But free movement rules in the EU treaties do not allow us to take that kind of step. To the British people, it is a key issue. And of course, there's the debate about collective security and the role the EU plays in it. And no city understands more the security challenge that we face than the one we're sitting in now. Many argue that the EU is crucial to collaboration on security matters. I'd simply say to you this: for the United Kingdom's point of view, we have, I think, some of the best security services in the world. The key relationships they have for gathering intelligence, for working together to combat terrorism, are elsewhere in the world: the United States, countries in the Middle East, Asia. And of course we work together with other European nations. We share a huge amount of intelligence with other European nations. But we have bilateral agreements to share this around the world. Why would it be any different if we were outside the European Union? We all need to work together, inside or outside the EU, to combat terrorism. Now, there's a whole variety of other reasons that I could argue for Britain leaving the European Union. I think the institutions in the EU have stretched their involvement far too far into the territory of national governments. I think the existing treaties give the Commission freedom to extend its remit in a way that should not be possible. But fundamentally, it is about that question of sovereignty and the ability of my country to look after its own national interest. I think it's too limited already today, but actually that's not the point. The point is about what the EU is now going to become. As it moves towards political union, that situation will become more and more pronounced. And that fundamentally is why I think Britain should leave. I don't want the departure to be acrimonious. I suspect all of us in the room who are elected politicians have come across constituents whose lives have been badly damaged by an acrimonious divorce. But you know, divorce isn't always acrimonious. Those who deal with it best, who ensure their lives continue without problem, are those who reach an amicable agreement and stay friends. And ladies and gentlemen, that is what I hope we and our European partners can do when, as I believe it will, Britain votes to leave the European Union this summer.
Thank you very much for being precise and clear about the arguments. I would say, in a way, the flip side of your presentation about the position of the UK is to give hope to those who want further integration and political union. You seem to think it's possible. But thank you for this intellectual honesty. It's very important in the debate. So I'll pass the floor to Richard Corbett. Richard Corbett will respond as another representative of the UK. He's member of the European Parliament for the Labour Party. He's deputy leader of the European Parliamentary Labour Party. And he has been an advisor to President Van Rompuy during the first term of the President, as his first term as President of the European Council. And he has been a frequent writer and commentator on European affairs, which has earned him the place of one of the most influential Britain on EU policy, at least by some people. So, Richard Corbett, the floor is yours, and we are delighted to hear the counter-arguments that you are ready to present.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, to take part in this very important debate. And you said, Chairman, in your introduction that Egmont wants to contribute to a rational debate, and I very much hope to do so. We were talking just now at the end of Mr. Grayling's remarks about political union. I've always wondered what exactly people mean, because people mean different things when they say this. I mean, we have a union now, and it seems to me to be pretty political. So what are the exact changes that are envisaged? Mr. Grayling's comments were in part predicated on the fact that he expects the Eurozone to integrate further and then dominate the rest of the European Union. I agree that the countries that share a common currency need to do more together to manage that situation. Indeed, they have done a lot. How much further they will go is still very much open for debate. They've not resolved many of the issues, and there are different views among them about how much further you need to go. But I would submit that, nonetheless, the bulk of what is done in the European Union is at the level of the 28. The Eurozone countries, yes, may need to do more together, but the bulk of what we do as a family of neighbouring countries is at the level of the rest of the 28. The single market, with its consequent economic effects and the legislation to underpin it on consumer protection, competition policy, environmental standards, some aspects of workplace rights. That's fundamental. Huge economic importance. It's at the level of the 28. The cooperation on aspects of police and justice is at the level of the 28 for the bulk of it. The work that we do together on agriculture, on fisheries, the work on scientific research, where more and more we are pooling resources to get a better effect, to have a bigger bang for your buck, as the Americans say, an area where spending money at European level can save you money at national level through economies of scale and avoiding duplication. What we do together on cultural things, the Erasmus student exchange program, what we do on overseas development, all these things are done at the level of the 28. So yes, a subset may be doing more to manage the situation of having a common currency. That does not mean that they are going to act as a bloc in all these other fields to impose policies on the hapless member states that have chosen not to join the euro. That will simply not, in my view, be the situation. Which brings us to why we have this European Union. It's a framework for a group of neighbouring countries that are highly interdependent, whether we like it or not, on a whole range of subjects, to work together. Mr. Grayling says he hopes we should stay working together, even if the UK leaves. But it's a strange way to say, let's keep on working together, to walk out slamming the door on the very framework we have developed together to work together. That's the purpose of the European Union. And it's, I think, wishful thinking to think that having walked out slamming the door, we would be a welcome partner in all these useful frameworks for cooperation. And that's leaving to one side the original motivation for the European Union, which we tend to forget. The pioneers who, after the Second World War, said we need to find a better way of doing things. Every generation from the fall of the Roman Empire till 1945 went out and slaughtered each other on the battlefield. That was the original inspiration behind this process. That's why the European Union won the Nobel Peace Prize. We tend to take that for granted now. We shouldn't. You don't need to look very far beyond the borders of Europe to see how precious it is to have created an area of stability which brings countries together in a common framework, that develops common interests, like the common market. To nonchalantly throw all that away and say, oh, we can opt out of that and it won't have any further consequences, I think is a huge risk. Mr. Grayling also spoke about trade and said, well, no problem if we leave the European Union, we will continue to have full access to the single European market. There will be a reciprocal trade deal. Actually, those that leave the European Union, wish to leave the European Union in Britain, are quite divided on what alternative they are offering. Some indeed say, yes, let's hug the European Union closely. We'll get a trade deal. We will still be part of the single market, effectively. Assuming that you get such a deal having just walked out, that everybody else is very compliant to Britain's wishes, then Britain would end up in a situation similar to Norway, accepting all the rules but having no say in them, a non-voting member. Many on the Leave side realise that this is not a very attractive option, so they have a different option. Going global. Forget Europe. Let's trade more with the growing economies of China, India, etc. There are two problems with that scenario. One is that if you are going global completely, you're outside the single market. You face a tariff barrier. British manufacturing goods will not be sold, for the most part, in the single market without a tariff. So you'll be losing trade with the rest of Europe. So you'd actually have to do better with the rest of the world to compensate for that loss. Though the first thing you need to do leaving the European Union is to negotiate new trade agreements with countries all over the world to replace the ones you currently have via the European Union, where we have negotiated deals with the full clout, the full muscle of the world's largest single market, where we have obtained good deals. The alternative is to negotiate just as Britain alone and try and secure not just the same deals, but better deals to replace what we will have lost via the European Union. I don't think that will be so easy. Let me take just one example. The EU-South Korea trade deal, which entered into force 4 years ago. Britain has doubled its exports to South Korea since then, in just 4 years. Why? Because we gained access to the Korean market in exchange for them getting access to the European market. But South Korea was interested in the European market, mostly, given what it produces, because of Germany. That's what they were interested in. If we come along now as Britain and say, oh, we want the same deal for us, let alone a better deal to make up for our lost trade with Europe, they will look in askance at us. So I think this is both the alternatives offered on the one hand by part of the Leave campaign that says, oh, we'll really stay in the European Union, we just won't be part of the political part of it, which means the decision-taking part of it. And the other alternative, we'll go global and divorce completely from Europe. Neither of them, in my view, are viable options. Mr. Grayling mentioned also the vexed issue of immigration. This is an issue, of course, in all our countries. But the Leave campaign, especially those in UKIP, I must say, have conflated together EU freedom of movement, the refugee crisis, and those seeking to be economic migrants coming to Europe from outside, and said it's all the same thing and we can't control our frontier. I would contend the opposite. Britain can control its frontier better because it's in the European Union. Most migrants to Britain, up to now, have come from outside the European Union, which is entirely under British rules. Inside the European Union, there is a reciprocal right of free movement, with almost as many Brits living in other EU countries as there are people from other European countries in Britain. So if you look at this even from a narrow, selfish national point of view, it's not the EU migration that is triggering the big rise in numbers, the bigger part of that. It's non-EU migration. And it's certainly not the EU migration that's triggering any costs, because EU citizens working in Britain pay 1/3 more in taxes than they take out in benefits and services added together. So neither in terms of cost nor in terms of numbers is it the EU part of the equation that is the big challenge for Britain. Migration from outside the EU is entirely under British rules that Britain determines in its legislation, subject, of course, to the Geneva Conventions of the United Nations, but on asylum policy, which wouldn't change if we left anyway. It's Britain that decides who can come in under what conditions, etc. But in that, controlling our own frontier, this is the big mantra of the Leave campaign. We must regain control of our borders. I don't know how many of you have travelled to Britain recently, but it's very difficult, I think, to get in without being controlled, without being checked. The fences in Calais around the entrance to the Channel Tunnel with its 2 levels of fencing and barbed wire look increasingly like the Berlin Wall used to look like. It's quite insurpassable. But, so you can't get in without being checked, whether you're allowed in or not. And Britain is better able to maintain that situation if you do take a hard line on migration, thanks to being in the European Union. One, because it can keep that border control at Calais, which depends on the goodwill of France, and that is being challenged in France by some politicians. Whether we would keep that goodwill if we left the European Union is doubtful. Second, because of the Dublin rule, where asylum seekers can be sent back to the country where they first requested it. You can waive that rule, of course, as Germany has done, but Britain has chosen not to, so it can rely on it and does rely on it for 4,000 or 5,000 people a year. And thirdly, you share the police and intelligence cooperation, which Mr. Grayling was somewhat dismissive just now, saying, well, our security cooperation is much better with the rest of the world, America and so on. Fine, that can continue, but why cut off the European aspect of our security cooperation? Why walk out on that? It's another benefit of the European Union. So even if you do take a hard line on immigration, the conclusion still is that you're better off in the European Union. But these issues will now be aired and adumbrated in what I think will be a difficult campaign, because some people have made no secret that they wish it to be a fact-free campaign. Project Fantasy versus Project Fear, these arguments will be bounced around. There is a lot, in my view, to be fearful of in leaving the European Union. It's valid to make those points. But there is, I think, a positive vision that we should make, going back to that original reason for the European Union, those reasons of pragmatism and idealism that caused the countries of Europe to work together in this unique project of bringing sovereign countries to work together on those areas where working together you can achieve more than you can separately. It's a gain of sovereignty for the 13 or 14% of laws that we make jointly at European level. Those are on things that you cannot adequately or not as well deal with at national level. It's an added value which we all have and we all share. And I will certainly, as by the way will my party, we are pretty united on this, unlike the Conservative Party, which is having a civil war, which indeed caused this problem in the first place. We will be campaigning solidly to remain in the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, Stephen Fidler is the Brussels editor of the Wall Street Journal. He's a keen observer of the Brussels scene. His group of newspapers and Newswise has done outstanding reporting on what's happened in the European Union, in and around the European Union. Stephen Fidler has among other talents, a strong background in economics, and we are looking forward now to hear what he has to say as an observer of how he sees these Europeans debating about their future. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a preamble. I'm the Brussels editor of the Wall Street Journal. It means I'm on the news side of the organization and not on the editorial side of the organization. And being an American newspaper, there's a church-state separation between the news and the editorial line. And I am endeavoring here to analyze rather than to commentate. But I'm already finding with this debate, and not all these debates are as decorous as this one has been so far tonight, I'm finding that one man's cool-headed analysis is another man's scaremongering. So I'm going to try and thread that needle. To start off with the referendum question, there's always, I think to say, you know the question you ask in a referendum, but you don't know the question people will answer. That's supposed to have been said by Charles de Gaulle, whose political career was ended by a referendum. Something very like it was said by Michel Rocard. So there is a risk that events other than those directly related to the question on the ballot paper could be decisive when it comes to June 23rd. The most obvious risk probably relates to a burgeoning of the refugee crisis and the conflation of the immigration issue, that is, as we've heard, such a live one in the UK. So even though the UK's border shields it from the influx, certainly, of the refugees, there is a possibility that voters might be swayed by concerns that the crisis is getting out of hand. That said, there is a long history of referendums on constitutional and quasi-constitutional issues around the world and in Europe. And not always, but in a majority of cases, people tend to vote for the status quo. That doesn't always mean they vote for what the government wants, and indeed it's not clear what the government wants in the UK at the moment anyway. But for example, in France and the Netherlands, the 2005 referendums over a new EU constitution were votes against the government of the day, but votes nonetheless for leaving things as they were. And as polling day draws near, pollsters suggest there's usually some shift towards voting for the devil people know, rather than the devil they don't know. So the referendum will be to some extent a contest between voters' natural conservatism, with a small c, and the unpredictability of events. Another point, making fish soup out of an aquarium is a lot easier than going in the other direction. So nobody would claim, I don't think, that the UK can't survive or thrive outside the European Union. There is, I think, though, a substantial economic risk in the transition, which will be very complicated. If it leaves, and if it does leave, the policies it adopts in the meantime will matter in determining how successful an economy it is. We're told on both sides of the English Channel that neither the British government nor the European Commission are drawing up contingency plans for a UK exit. But before, that doesn't mean that exit is necessarily going to be easy. And before the two sides can live apart in harmony, as we've heard, they will have to negotiate a divorce, and there is no precedent for such a split. Up for negotiation will be 80,000 pages of agreements under 35 chapter headings, from agricultural, fisheries, financial services, justice, employment, health, and beyond. In parallel, arrangements for a new trade relationship with the UK would need to be resolved, as well as trade relations with the more than 50 other countries with which the EU has trade agreements. The central aim would be a withdrawal agreement between the 27 remaining states and the UK. This would in some ways mirror the accession accords that new member states must sign before joining the EU, with one big complicating difference. In an accession agreement, the two sides know what they are converging toward. In a withdrawal agreement, the end state is unknown in advance. So, assuming a leave vote on June 23rd, the negotiations would almost certainly be kicked off, as David Cameron has said, by London invoking for the first time Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. This article, which gives any member state the right to withdraw from the EU, foresees 2 years of negotiations over withdrawal, unless extended by agreement from both sides. But 2 years looks hugely ambitious timetable to unwind the more than 40 years of EU membership and all the things I was talking about earlier. Negotiating a simpler trade accord with Canada took 7 years and it's not yet done. And once negotiations are complete and the withdrawal agreement finalised, it would have to go through the process of ratification through the 28 states. So in the negotiation, the British will have to negotiate, as we've heard, a trade-off between achieving greater sovereignty and autonomy on the one hand, and access to the single market on the other. If the UK is to retain access to the single market, most calculations suggest it would also have to agree to the principle of free movement of people within the bloc and subject itself to future rule changes in the single market without having any say over them. After a referendum in which many people voting to leave will have done so because they want British control over internal EU migration and to regain sovereignty, this may not seem an ideal destination. So some campaigners in the exit camp argue that the departure could be done in stages. The first step would be to leave the EU and join the European Economic Area, along with Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland. That would keep the UK in the single market, though it would probably also mean accepting free movement, rules set by Brussels, a contribution to the EU budget, all the things Norway does. But it would also need 30 other governments to agree, the 27 and the 3 members of the EEA. However, it could, some argue, critically minimise the fear factor in the referendum by reducing the risk of economic disruption in the post-exit period. After that, the EEA would be a safe platform to negotiate a further step away from the rules and regulations of the EU. This is controversial, I think, among exit proponents, in part because, in their view, it doesn't unshackle the country quickly enough from the EU corpse. It also raises questions about the dynamics of a post-exit negotiation. In particular, how incentivised would the EU 27 be to conduct a second negotiation over exit from the EEA? While this is going on, the UK would need to get its legislative machinery into gear. Free to do what it wants, what would the UK want to do with that freedom? I think the answer could take a decade. The legislative agenda of the British Parliament for year after year after year will be completely dominated by the process of exit. The moment the UK leaves, thousands of pages of EU regulation would no longer have the force of law, unless the UK, to avoid a legal vacuum, would vote to keep them in place until the replacements are legislated. The government would have to sift through UK legislation introduced as a result of directives to decide what it wanted. It would have to rebuild a trade department with hundreds of civil servants to negotiate trade agreements, probably increase the capacity of other government departments such as that in competition, and do a host of things now done at an EU level. So Mr. Cameron evidently doesn't want to embark on this process, and a government paper published last month concluded a vote to leave the EU would be the start, not the end of the process. It would begin a period of uncertainty, of unknown length, and an unpredictable outcome. That's Her Majesty's government. His opponents retort that the difficulties of transition are being exaggerated, but even if the transition is complicated, the final destination of liberation from the EU makes the risk worthwhile. For them, the end more than justifies the means, however difficult. More about the final destination later, but a word on the negotiations. My working assumption has been that the atmosphere for the withdrawal negotiations will be less than wonderful. At least, this is how they will start. I don't think there's going to be a very good feeling about it, because while David Cameron's agreement has been widely dismissed by many in the UK as worthless, I don't think that's the impression that people have on this side of the water. Many governments think they've leant over backwards to accommodate the UK, to be rebuffed, if that's the case, in the referendum. That's one reason why I see very little chance that the hope of some Leave proponents that after a vote to leave, that EU 27 will come back and offer better terms for the British to stay will be fulfilled. Among other things, it would set enormous concerns on the continent about the precedent that this would set for others. So if it's to be Brexit, the first thing to say is that it matters what the UK does after it leaves. What kind of economy is created after exit? The vision of some who favour leave is that the economy can become much more dynamic and outward-facing, stripped of the EU-inspired social and other regulation that's holding it back. Many market economists say that this would be the way to go in the case of exit. But I don't necessarily see, and I'm British, I have a vote, I haven't been out of the country for 15 years, but I don't necessarily see a consensus among the British people that this sort of dynamic market-based economy is what they want. It would presumably require a national debate, which the UK hasn't had. How much of the social protection now embedded in EU-related legislation would the UK government choose to get rid of? It does raise to me the question about whether the UK government could find the political support to create this free market vision of a more dynamic economy. I think it would take much longer than 2 years also, the period set out in the Article 50, to adjust to its new situation. Now, on the question of the trade relations afterwards, I kind of take a position between Richard and Chris Grayling. I think there will be big challenges. I think the likelihood is that the EU will, in the immediate aftermath of departure, face more obstacles to trade than it does at present. I think, as I've said, it'll be difficult for the UK to agree to terms of access to the single market because of the baggage that comes with it. But I don't think it's difficult to conceive of a zero-tariff regime being negotiated for manufacturing and some agricultural products. I think that would be viewed as beneficial in the UK and just about everywhere in the EU. If so, it should reduce disruption for manufacturing industries and complicated supply chains, if that's the case. The North American Free Trade Agreement has shown that complex industrial supply chains can thrive in a free trade area. And it's probably in the interests of many influential interests on both sides of the English Channel that tariff-free trade continues. Without it, most favoured nation tariffs under the World Trade Organization rules would put 9.8% tariffs on cars, a 12.1% tariff on goods vehicles, a 3.8% tariff on motor vehicle parts, and on wine there would be a 32% tariff. So one could see a constituency on both sides of the channel to have the tariff on French wines reduced from 32%. Two things here to say, and I'm wrapping up quite soon. First, as tariff levels have fallen generally, non-tariff barriers have become much more important and insidious as a restraint of trade. So non-tariff barriers is very hard to deal with in a free trade agreement. And outside the single market, the EU would be more vulnerable to non-tariff barriers to trade inside the EU. Secondly, while trade theory would tell you that the same arguments about free trade should apply in services as well in manufacturing, I think it would be very, very hard for the UK to gain access to the services market in the UK on the same basis. Services accounts for more than 80% of the UK economy. The UK runs a big surplus on services with other UK members, and there will be a strong temptation, although it's economic nonsense, there will be a strong temptation for other countries to try to grab market share away from London and its hyper-efficient financial markets, particularly in places like Paris, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and Luxembourg. All will see opportunities in shutting out the UK, and I think that will be the feeling of the negotiations. And with no EU passport for financial services, many institutions that want to do business in the bloc will have to move out of London, because at the moment the UK passport gives them access to the rest of the EU, and also in the area of securities clearing, that's probably likely to move in the euro. That's likely to move out of the eurozone too. General points. The effect of a British departure for EU on the United Kingdom. I raise it. It hasn't been raised. I think it's more likely that it would trigger a further referendum on Scottish independence. And I think it would create potential difficulties for Northern Ireland. We've already heard Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams say a British exit would strengthen the case for a united Ireland. Final word on sovereignty. Sovereignty is not like pregnancy, I don't think. It's not something you have or you have not. Governments choose to cede sovereignty to all kinds of institutions, to the UN, to NATO, to the World Trade Organization. And unless a country wants North Korea-like independence, it must also cede sovereignty to financial markets. For many people in the UK, it's obvious that the particular obligations entailed by membership of the European Union are onerous and excessive, but I think it's not necessarily the case that the world outside the EU will be a more agreeable place to them. A couple of final points, if I may refer to what's been said, and then I'll stop. Mr. Grayling's representation of the five presidents in report as an important document runs somewhat counter to its the general feeling about it here in Brussels. It seems to have developed from the four presidents' report. It gained a president and became less and less specific. And while the Eurozone may need to go down this road, I don't see a lot of political appetite for that to happen. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we heard a lot of very different arguments and very different issues being raised. Those of principles, those of practicalities, and those of unintended consequences. I think it's very important that also we realize, and I fully agree with Chris Grayling, even if we separate, we can remain friends. And there are values that will continue to be shared values, liberal democracy and free enterprise, among other things. While we're discussing that, I think the world around us is changing, and we need to be aware of that too. I think it's very important. So I'll open the floor now for questions or short comments. Please identify yourself, and if you want to address your question to a particular speaker, please do so. The first is the gentleman over there.
I'm Tom Trumpy. I'm an American lawyer and economist. I wish to thank Mr. Grayling for his excellent speech and say, yes, I come from a federal state where we continue to fight to squeeze out state power by an enormous central government. And I wondered whether, as was suggested by our last speaker, whether the moment has finally come for a true devolution to a federal government in the UK as an example to some of the other countries. We have a fairly successful federal state in Germany with more reserved powers than many of the countries in the EU. Can you see a possible devolution at the limit perhaps of 3 Celtic republics of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and the Anglo-Saxons remaining a kingdom in which floats out to sea?
Well, I mean, we are actually at the moment going through a significant process of devolution, both to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, where, and particularly Scotland, in the wake of the referendum, Scotland is gaining far more autonomy than it's ever had before since the Act of Union was passed 200 years ago. And I think that's right and sensible, and we are looking to push power away within England. We're looking to strengthen the powers of the Welsh Assembly. I think the point that was made briefly about Scotland voting for independence if the United Kingdom votes to leave the European Union, there are 2 big issues around that. The first is that Scotland's finances don't add up right now. If Scotland had voted for independence, it would be becoming independent next week, and would have, as a result of its move towards independence and the dramatic fall in the oil price, the biggest financial deficit in Europe, and we'll be facing a very serious financial crisis right now. So I'm very glad for our Scots colleagues and friends that they didn't do that. The other issue, of course, if Scotland leaves the United Kingdom because the United Kingdom has left the European Union, there's no way Scotland's going to be able to rejoin the European Union because the Spanish won't have it. The issue of Catalonia becomes a significant issue. So it is actually, in my view, absolutely not clear that if the United Kingdom votes to leave the European Union, Scotland will depart. I don't accept that for a moment. But in terms of the United States, I mean, the devolution model is, in my view, a sound one. It's one we're pursuing. But the United States would never have given up as much control over its laws, its legislation, its sovereignty as the United Kingdom has in the European Union today, let alone what the European Union is going to become. And I think we'll probably discuss in a moment a bit more the issue of the 5 Presidents' report, the direction of travel. I don't believe the European Union has any option but to move down that road. If the Eurozone is to survive, and the Eurozone has been through the most monumental crisis, that crisis hasn't gone away. There are huge structural differences within the Eurozone economy. If those are ever going to be solved, if they're ever going to go away, the only way it can be done is through much greater harmonisation and much greater unification of control of that economy. And that inevitably means political control of that economy as well. So, regardless of whether it's popular in Brussels or not, if the euro is going to survive in the future, then I don't see there's any option but that road to be followed.
Just a very brief comment on the general thing about the enormous central government and the fear that we're going to have an enormous centralised EU. The EU is anything but centralised. The Eurosceptics in Britain have a nice little narrative that runs off the tongue that 80% of our laws are decided by a remote and unelected bureaucracy in Brussels and there's nothing we can do about it. Every aspect of that is not true. The central administration, if you mean the European Commission, has about the same number of employees as say, Leeds City Council in my constituency, not very different. It only has the right to propose European legislation to become law. It needs the approval of a very hefty majority of ministers in the Council of Ministers and a majority in the European Parliament. There's a double check on anything the EU does. If ever you hear a country say, Brussels has imposed this on us, as if member states are blissfully unaware of the procedure, take it with a pinch of salt. And the European budget is 2% of public spending that's carried out at EU level. 98% is national or local. Some superstate. If this whole referendum is based on the fear of over-centralisation in Brussels, which is what some people wish it to be based on, then it's based on a lie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Geert Meule. I am a board member of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Brussels. I am not dealing on a daily basis with EU matters. I have 2 or 3 remarks and 1 question. The first remark is on the substance. The EU, as the EU is now, is also the product of the UK. The UK has made the UK, co-made the EU as the EU is now. It's not perfect, far from that, we know that. There are divergent viewpoints, etc. We have had many crises, we have been dealing with them, with the UK. We muddled through it, we found solutions, we hanged on. And now that the going gets rough, the UK are just leaving. That's not how I got to know the UK and the British people. This is a big disappointment for me. A second remark, the 27 went at lengths in order to give a package to Cameron and to the UK people. It's now up to Cameron and the UK people. It's their decision. Whatever decision will be taken, it's going to be theirs. The blaming game is not a game that will be able to be played, and we will all know very well where the responsibilities lie. Now, if the UK leaves and how its relationship to the EU or the 27 member states will develop, it's utterly unknown. We just don't know it. So it's a gamble. And I'm very surprised that countries, serious people, serious diplomats, and a country such as the UK wants to take that kind of a gamble. A third remark, Brexit will certainly weaken the stature of the EU in the world, certainly. But it will also weaken the stature of the UK in the world. The UK might be a big country with a big economy, but compared to the US, the 27, China, India, Japan, it's not going to be up to the tough negotiations. So your bargaining power is going to be much lower than it is now through the EU. So these are a few remarks that I want to give on a personal basis. And now I have a question. That is, what is going to happen within the UK and within UK society after such a vote that will certainly be won or lost by a very narrow margin?
So let me give you a quick response to the point you just made and also an answer to your question. It is worth saying, when you talk about the ability of a country to reach agreements in the world, to carry weight in the world, that Switzerland, a small independent country, not in the European Union, has negotiated free trade agreements around the world that have secured access to markets for its businesses 3 times larger than the European Union has managed to negotiate. So if it is not possible for an independent individual country to forge agreements around the world, why has Switzerland done so much better than the European Union has done in forging such agreements? But on the question of what happens in UK society, my judgment is that probably 75% of the UK public are not enthusiastic about or would choose to leave the European Union. When it comes to the vote, the decision for some of those people will be what we've discussed tonight. Do I want to take the step that has been put to you as the alternative? Do I believe there's a risk in doing it? Do I not believe there's a risk in doing it? And so there will be some people who decide that better the devil you know. And so it will, I suspect, be quite a close result. But you should not interpret a close result as being a great ideological division in British society. The number of people who I would describe as enthusiastic members of the European Union is a distinct minority of the British public.
Thank you. Other? Yes, please.
Just follow up. Just so I wanted to, first of all, agree with Chris Grayling that the Scots dodged an absolute bullet in the independence referendum. Economically, it would have been a disaster. On the free trade agreements, yes. I mean, there is a question of quality. I mean, I think the Swiss have negotiated a lot of free trade agreements. Not all of them are that great, and certainly the one with China would not be one that I would find agreement here, because it effectively admits Chinese goods tariff-free, for almost immediately, and then there's a major delay, I think 10 to 15 years before Swiss goods get tariff-free access to China. So you would...
not Swiss watches.
So there is a question of quality, not just of quantity.
Well, I want to try and, my name is Tom Rowe. I was a banker and then a consultant in America with McKinsey. And then I decided to go into public service at the European Commission. So I sort of went native. When I'm asked where I come from, I always say I'm a Londoner. I don't even say English or Scottish. I say I come from London. And I married a Belgian and then I married a German, Bavarian. And one piece of advice I have for Mr. Grayling is get married in Belgium, but don't get divorced in Belgium. I'll explain this to you. The young people, this is very useful for the young people here. There are two prenuptials you'd get in Belgium. One is called a commune. You share everything, like in England. And the other one is séparation des biens. Everything is defined as separate, which is what the British always wanted when they joined the European Union. The trouble is, when you get divorced, in Belgium, they have a very civilized system, which I think is brilliant, is you can't talk about money until after you're divorced. You have to get divorced because it's broken down. And then after you've got divorced, you discuss the deal. You know, money, houses, children, stuff like that. And that's what's going to happen to the UK if it quits. Because Article 50 is brutal, and its implementing regulations are even more brutal. You quit, and then you have to negotiate with the other 27, and not even the officials in the council who are British, or the officials in the commission who are British, can even see the documents. So it's sort of, you know, really a disaster. You basically get divorced and you don't know anything about your plans, and that's, you know, Brexit. The Brexit people got no idea. They just say, we can do this, do that. But that, you know, that's a particular problem. The other one I would say is absolutely brutal. I was actually head of delegation in 2 ex-British colonies. Ambassador, yes? The EU's ambassador. I have to say, I'm not a modest person. I had better access than the British ambassador. In Hong Kong, a consul general, in Singapore. Why? Because the EU is a big deal. They used to do lots of stuff with the British Council. I'd be a bit rude, you know, you have nice cultural events and things. But the British ambassador was a second-line person. And the UK does not have, apart from London as a centre, financially, culturally, perhaps, but the UK as a country doesn't have the punch to be there. It's got to be working globally. Yes, everything you say about what the UK should do globally, I agree with, but it's got to use all the possibilities, and being a member of the EU gives you more leverage. I just don't understand why you want to throw out some of the toolkit.
Well, as I said to you, it's about our role in the future. And indeed in the present. I don't believe today, I see an absolute imperative for the European Union to move towards much closer integration in order to enable the Eurozone to survive. I don't see a role for Britain in that. And you know, we ultimately have to decide. It's about also, do you feel confident in yourself as a nation? It's also a point that people have not touched upon this evening about, you know, us negotiating access to European markets. We are a vital customer for producers across Europe. We have the most momentous trade deficit. I mean, the idea that Britain is a huge beneficiary for the single market in the way Germany is. Germany has a 60 billion euros plus trade surplus with the European Union. Britain has a nearly 60 billion pounds a year trade deficit with the European Union. So it is actually about mutual interest. It's not about us going with a begging bowl to the EU and saying, oh, please can we still sell things to you? We can. We can all do that under WTO rules. If we have to deal with tariffs, actually, you end up paying more to us than we pay to you, because we run that large trade deficit. But why would anybody do that? Why would anybody spike their own producers? Why would the French put their agricultural producers at a disadvantage, saying to them, well, you can have a 40% tariff on your dairy products to sell French brie into British supermarkets where Somerset brie can be sold without those tariffs? It would be insanity. Why would any sane person do that? And so sorry? Why would any sane government disadvantage its businesses? You know, you sell collectively, other European member states sell far more to us than the other way around. And that is a crucial reason. That is a crucial reason why it will be perfectly sensible, economically sensible, financially sensible, to make sure that the free trade area that runs from Iceland to the Russian border continues even if Britain is outside the European Union. I simply don't accept any logic in anything else otherwise being the case.
This line that we sell more to them than to us, therefore they will do what we want in a trade deal, has become a mantra of your side of the argument. But let's not bear one thing in mind, the proportions of that. About half of Britain's trade is with the rest of the European Union. It's vital for our economy. 14% of our GDP depend on those exports. For the rest of the European Union, what they sell to Britain, and the jobs, of course, related to all this, both ways around, that's 2%, 2.5% of their combined GDP. For us, it's vital. For the rest of Europe, it's important, but it's not so vital. Who would have the upper hand in those negotiations, do you think? Would there not be pressure in other EU countries for protectionist interests here and there against, say, British beef? It might not be a tariff, it might be a phytosanitary protection they go for to keep out British beef again, the way the Americans still don't accept British beef, by the way. Europe does, because we defended our interests in Europe. So I don't buy this for one moment. And as to the line, we are a proud nation, every nation in Europe is a proud nation. We've not come together to lose our identities. The motto of the European Union is unity with diversity, and long may it be so. We are all proud nations. But most of us can admit that, and perhaps the British should be better at this than others, that you can be both English and British, or Scottish and British, and European. Why not? It's not one or the other. I support England in football, Britain in the Olympics, and Europe in the Ryder Cup against the Americans in golf every 2 years, where that's the one occasion you see lots of Brits all waving the European flag as we beat the Americans in the Ryder Cup. It's not contradictory, it's different dimensions to our makeup. Why not celebrate these dimensions?
Thank you. I'll come to the others, but I said that plenty of young people and they're backbenchers, so the lady over there has been raising her hand for a while, so your turn.
I'm Francesca Sanna on behalf of Eulogos Athena, and I'd like to raise one question to Sir Grayling and one question to Sir Corbett. And my first question will be, you mentioned that, to Sir Grayling first, okay, that you really seem to propose to us that the very rationale of politics for the UK in this nowadays scenario is to follow his own interest, which is the interest of basically having a share in a company. But at the same time, more than 30 of the FTSEs, so the most capitalized company in UK, in the London Stock Exchange, have signed actually to stay within Europe. So how is that compatible with self-determination in terms of economic reason? And the second thing will be, if it's so easy to jump on a bus to get a job in the UK, I'm sure you are referring to low-wage jobs. So if the border will be really, in a way, more strictly controlled, and UK will lack this kind of migration that seeks for very low-wage jobs, we can expect that the wage of the low-wage job will raise. So at the same time, how can that be compatible with the UK being, competing with China at the global level? And the second question to Sir Corbett will be, as you mentioned, the Second World War, in terms of peacekeeping and the very ratio that launched the European integration effort. Last Wednesday, there has been a petition, British citizen living in Italy started a process claiming that actually there is a kind of discrimination in this regard, because as British expatriates that live more than 15 years abroad are not allowed to vote for this referendum. So how can that be? You see, if you can really seek a window of opportunity to change this kind of rule in order to let people that would be, potentially interested in keeping the UK within Europe voting on the 23rd of June. Thank you.
Okay, on the question addressed to me, the franchise in this referendum has fallen, I think, victim to David Cameron's understandable desire to try and reunite his party again afterwards, and he's given a number of concessions to the Eurosceptic right wing of his party on who is allowed to vote. First, is what you mentioned. Most British citizens living in other EU countries will not be allowed to vote. Second, he refused to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote, as happened in the Scottish independence referendum, on the ground that this was a long-term decision affecting mainly young people for years to come. You can't change your mind in 5 years like in an election, so they should be able to vote. That surely applies in this case as well, but he's refused to do so. Thirdly, EU citizens living in Britain, say a Dutch lady who's lived there for 20 years maybe, has British children, British husband, will not be allowed to vote, although they will be affected, undoubtedly. But on the other hand, Commonwealth citizens living in Britain will be allowed to vote, even from Rwanda, which joined the Commonwealth, I think it was 2 years ago, with no historical connection to Britain. So all these are marginal decisions, but if the referendum is close, they could tip the balance.
Well, just to add to that, the people who are going to be voting in the referendum are the same people who voted in our general election last year. It's exactly the same, with one, sorry, can I? Well, actually with two exceptions. The first is the people of Gibraltar, who unusually are able to participate because of their position within the European Union. And the second is members of our House of Lords, who are not normally able to vote in general elections, but this time can. But there's 800 of them, and I suspect they will vote for remaining in the European Union rather than in favour, so I'm not sure that's actually helped the Leave cause particularly. But otherwise, it is our general election electorate, and that's that is the way that the government's approached it. I think it's the right one. Now, on the 2 points you raised, firstly on the low-wage issue, I don't want Britain to be a low-wage economy. And actually, one of the things that has been said of the approach that we might take for the future is it might actually improve conditions for some of the people on the lowest wages. It would actually ensure that some wages went up. I'm not in favour of using migration to drive down wage levels. It has had that effect in the United Kingdom. And of course, what's happened in the United Kingdom is some very good and articulate people who've come from Eastern Europe, well qualified, and are doing jobs in the United Kingdom that are below the level which their qualifications suit them for. I've never been quite sure how the countries of Eastern Europe benefit from that. The wage differentials between the western part of Europe and the eastern part of Europe make that migration a one that people choose to follow. On the business community, it is certainly the case. Our business community is divided. Probably more members of the business community are in favour of staying than are in favour of leaving. It tends to be the smaller businesses that are affected by rules that come from Brussels. And we heard earlier that gentleman talking about the process of the Commission. I've represented the United Kingdom for 5 years on European Council meetings at different stages. I have never felt truly able to push back on proposals from the Commission that I believed were going to damage the interests of business. There have been some extraordinary examples of that. It is an extraordinarily difficult process, and it's a process where, as a member, a minister representing a member state, I can't even propose a motion in the council to get something considered, which seems to me to be fundamentally wrong, but that is the reality of the situation. But it tends to be our larger businesses that would prefer to stay, our smaller businesses that are saying they'd like to be free of the European Union.
Lady over there.
Thank you. I'm certainly not a young person, but I have the advantage of having been present from Jean Monnet to today in the whole development of the Union. And I'd like to say to Mr. Grayling that I fully understand why one wants to leave the Union. There are a lot of reasons, but not the fact that you think that we are going suddenly to be a political union, a defense union, with a minister. We are not there because we have never been there. Even Jean Monnet left the high authority because functionalism didn't work, that we did not go from coal and steel to what he wanted to be a political union. So I think I can't understand why you use this argument, because you don't need it. If you want to leave, and that is why I want to ask my friend Corbett, why he still thinks we are so united. The 28 do a lot of things together. We are more divided than we ever have been. I don't see why you still speak about the 28. The Visegrad countries are somewhere else. Even Belgium is speaking about Benelux, because they say if the Visegrad do it, why shouldn't we do it? The Northern do it too. So I think we are so much divided because there's no solidarity anymore. And your argument I don't agree with either.
Well, the first point, the sovereignty, there are two dimensions to the sovereignty issue. And if I remember rightly, Jean Monnet clearly set a path towards political union. But it is a reality, in my view, and it is a view that's been expressed by people like Wolfgang Schäuble, that political union is the only way of securing the long-term future of the euro. Without centralised control over budgets, if within a single nation, in the United Kingdom, where we have had economic difficulties over the years, it has been the duty and responsibility of the more prosperous parts of the country to support the least prosperous parts of the country. We've seen that happen within the European Union, as support has flowed from north to south. I don't see, though, for the future how the current stresses and strains that exist within the Eurozone area can possibly be set aside permanently without a substantial degree of political union. And of course, we already have a situation where the Eurozone countries have a permanent blocking majority or minority on the Council. That's not going to change. That's part of the Lisbon Treaty before we even get to the next stage of political union. So inevitably, the Eurozone countries, looking after their own financial and economic interest, which is just human nature, will have to take steps in their own economic interest, will have to pass laws that help them move towards greater stability and security of the future. And in all of that, I do not see how the United Kingdom has any voice at the table at all, because it never has the ability to actually be part of a majority when the Eurozone itself is the majority and must, by definition, act in its own interest.
Thank you. Richard Corbett, are we desperately divided?
The European Union is a framework where we come together to sort out our divisions and our differences of view. Of course, we don't have absolute unity of views on every subject. It's a place where we thrash out our differences. And some things in the European Union work well, others don't. Nobody's saying it's perfect. I don't think the United Kingdom is perfect, but I'm not saying Yorkshire should leave the United Kingdom. We try and change things and improve things. And we may have different views on that, but that's what we do in politics. As to the question of, we come back to this issue that the Eurozone needs to do more together. That's the Eurozone. We're talking here about the European Union as a whole. The Eurozone is an important part of that, and what they do together has to be strengthened. But the United Kingdom, there are 9 countries not in the Euro, 2 have a permanent opt-out, but the bulk of what the European Union does is at the level of the whole Union. And the fact that some may be doing a little bit more than they do, so what? It's in Britain's interest that the Euro works better. Great, we've encouraged it. But that doesn't mean that it's going to take over the whole European Union, start telling Britain what to do. Indeed, part of Cameron's package was protections against that and a fair balance between Eurozone and the rest. It's probably the most, arguably, the only sensible part of his package.
I would just say, just very briefly in response to that, of course, that only 2 member states are not obliged by treaty, and something that was restated in the agreement in Brussels a month ago, to join the euro. So it's inevitably, it is 26 versus 2 in terms of the future. And the question is, as I said earlier, increasingly as the Eurozone has to operate to secure its own future in an immensely difficult set of circumstances that are not really going away, it will have to take decisions in its own right. Where and how are the national interests of the other 2 member states? And of course, for Denmark, it's a matter of Denmark as to what they do. But where and how is the interest of the United Kingdom looked after in all of that?
Because they'll be taking decisions on the euro as a currency. On other things, we are involved in those decisions. The idea that the Eurozone is going to act as a cohesive bloc on foreign policy questions, when 2 or 3 of the countries are not even in NATO, or on scientific research questions, or on agriculture, or on fishing, or on everything else the European Union does, that they will caucus to outvote Britain on these things on which the range of views among them are just as great as among the whole 28, I think is totally implausible.
There's a union of 12 European parliaments, the leaders of 12 European parliaments, arguing that precisely such a change should take place.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Marika Anaf. I just joined the Belgian Foreign Service. I thank you for the lively debate. My question, actually I have a public diplomacy and communications background, so my question is related to communications. So we see a very strong campaign of the no camp going on in the UK, and they have very convincing arguments that are that have already convinced quite a lot of people. So my question is, what is the EU doing to communicate on why it is a positive project? Because that's what I've kind of less seen the last couple of years from the EU, is there are a lot of success stories, there is a lot of good work that's done by the EU, and also for UK citizens. So my question would be, how are you trying to find a counter-narrative to this no camp, and what's the EU doing to communicate better? Thank you.
Who's not British?
A question about communication. Of course, I think that at the European level we have a problem of communication. It's evident. I give you some example. I don't understand why, and we respect the vote of, for example, Polish citizens a few weeks ago, but you know that Poland has not the same reality as our countries. Poland now for 7 years has a growth rate of 3% per year, 3.5% of growth. The unemployment rate decreased from 13% 7 years ago up to 7% now. And they vote for the Eurosceptic Conservative Party. The Liberal Party is in the opposition. No more Socialist in the parliament. That is not good. But the party of Kaczynski won. Eurosceptic. They are against the integration of the Poland in Euro. But do you know that Poland received 82 billion euro from the European budget between 2014 and 2020? And the reason of the growth rate of the progress of some rural zone, it's thanks to the solidarity of all countries of Europe. And a country like this, and respectful for the vote, is democracy. But how is, you know, in the past, some country as Spain, Portugal, benefits from the solidarity of Europe. And of course, some region of southern Spain developed more thanks to the infrastructure, the roads, the equipment, and they were thankful for that, because in Spain, a long time ago, and not now, Spain, they are conscious that Europe, thanks to the European level, the European decisions, they made progress. And let me answer, I was rapporteur a few weeks ago on a new fruit, vegetables and milk scheme on schools, with an increasing of the budget, prioritize fresh fruit, fresh vegetables on school for health reason, because there is a lack of consumption of fruit and vegetable in Europe in 24 countries on 28. And when we spoke about educational measure and advertising, saying, oh, it's European decision, a lot of colleagues from UK, conservatives, say, no, it's not necessary, no advertising, no, because the European flag is a problem. I don't understand that, but you have, okay, we are always saying that it's a lack of communication from the European level, but I think more there's a responsibility of the member state. When it's a good decision or a good, they say that it's their decision, their own national decision. And when we have problems, it's the fault of Brussels. We in Belgium, we don't say Brussels because we are all in Brussels. Federal government, community, Flemish, Vlaamse West is in Brussels. Also the French-speaking community is in Brussels. But it's the fault of Brussels. And we have a problem with the behavior of member state, the government. And I think that communication is a key issue, and I think that in the future we have to resolve that and to be conscious that we are more and we progress more together with more solidarity and not with a Europe à la carte as you propose.
Can I just make one point in relation to that? So I cannot think of a better example this evening of why so many people in my country think the European Union has gone too far. Why on earth are we discussing the provision of fruit in schools at a European level? What on earth has it got to do with the European Union? And if you wanted a good example of why people in my country think the European Union intrudes too much into the lives of democratic nations, that is a great example of it. And you find other examples, and that is one of the reasons. It's not, I've set out for you tonight what I think is a really important reason about sovereignty, the future structure of the European Union. If you actually ask people in the streets in the United Kingdom who are going to vote to leave, why they're going to vote to leave, that's a really good example of precisely why they're going to do so.
May I, Chris?
Thank you. Yeah.
And briefly.
And then Stefan Fidler.
And why European level would not be involved in a problem of health? In Europe now, we have 20 to 30% of young people suffering from obesity. It's a huge problem on health, public health. And in each country, there is no solution. I repeat that, and UK is included in those countries, in 24 countries on 28, there is a lack of consumption of fruit and vegetable, following the recommendation of the WHO. It's our duty to say, hey, okay, we decide your educational measure, but to encourage to consume the highest consumption of fruit and vegetable, I think it's normal. We suggest to country, if you refuse, country can refuse the budget, but it's normal to discuss those important problems.
But that's the difference
at the European level.
That on the micro issues rather than the macro issues, the difference between us is that you see it's important that Europe has a view on that point. I see it as absolutely the opposite. This is not what Europe was for. It's what Europe has become, and it's one of the reasons why so many people in the United Kingdom are saying Europe has become too big, too all-intrusive, it's involving itself in areas it should not be. And that's, I think, one of the reasons. It's not just an issue within the United Kingdom, it's an issue around the European Union, where there is a sense that the EU itself is not right. And it's a great example. The European Union has lost, I think, a degree of direction that it perhaps once had many years ago. And that is one of the reasons that people in the United Kingdom would say that it is not right for them. And as I say, I've set out for you a very different set of reasons tonight, my concern about the future and the future role of the United Kingdom. But the difference between us here is I don't think the European Union has any role at all in health in schools and individual countries. That's why we have individual democratic nations to do the job.
No.
Hang on just a second. Stefan has been patient, and I want to come back to the issue of communication and selling the product.
My observation on that would be that it probably behoves Brussels to keep quite quiet about it if they genuinely want the UK to stay in. Martin Schulz, for example, is a very effective politician in Brussels, but I'm sure the Leave campaign and Chris Grayling would happily pay him to go to the UK and talk about the European Union. I think the same applies to people like Jean-Claude Juncker and others. This is something. Even Obama's visit is controversial, and this is going to be decided in the UK. It's going to be decided among UK campaigners and politicians and by the people. And I think at this point, I don't think really Brussels has a role.
Richard?
One sentence. Whether or not you should do something like this at European level is, irrespective of the Commission making proposals, is a matter for the ministers, like yourself, Chris, in the Council. National ministers, who are members of national governments, who are accountable to national parliaments, unless they say in the Council, yes, we should be doing this at European level, it won't happen at European level. So it's up to the national states to take that decision together in the Council.
Let's give the one-line response to that, which is, to give you a very practical example. I spent 2.5 years as employment minister on the EPSCO Council. I had a majority of member states who would speak out in favour of the Commission embarking upon a review of the rules around social security, because there is a conflict between the provisions in the treaty about social security and the free movement rules. I had no ability to propose a motion and get support from other member states to make it happen. None at all. I tried for 2 years to get this to happen. I could not make it happen because although other member states supported me, the Commission wouldn't do it.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. I see 3, 4 people who are still. I'll allow these 4 to come in, have all the questions asked, and then ask each member of the panel to give a quick response to everybody. And I see a lady over there too. So you start, then here, and there, and there.
Thank you. My name is Svetlana, and I am a trainee in the European Parliament Secretariat. So I have a remark about what actually that the member states basically can decide whether things should be decided at EU level or not. Just a small procedure between the Commission and the proposal goes to the Parliament. There is 8 weeks of member states' governments to give an opinion, a reasoned opinion. So basically, if more than 7 member states give a reasoned opinion that this thing should not go in the EU, that's an orange card for the EU, and the Commission should withdraw that thing. So if the member states cannot make coalitions before, well, that's problem of the member states, and that's lack of communication of the member states. And this refers me to the communication problem of the EU, which I definitely agree with the lady that raised that opinion. I would, maybe it's a suggestion to the MEPs, maybe you could consider some kind of report or trying to talk with member states. Yes, education is under open method of coordination, but basically...
Thank you. I think we got the sense of your question. I want to...
it's not a question, that was a remark.
Okay.
I have a question, 2 questions, and I just quickly ask them.
You've had your time. I'll allow this gentleman here, and then the gentleman over there. Yeah.
Thank you. I think now at the end, as always it is, we are in the core of the problem, because I think the exchange of view between Mr. Tarabella and Grayling, that is in the core of the problem. We are speaking about the citizenship, and that is the problem that in United Kingdom, the most of the people don't understand that they are citizens of the European Union as well. That means you are speaking, for example, about the immigrants from the European Union. They are not immigrants. They are citizens of the European Union which have rights which are putting down in the Lisbon Treaty. And when I am listening the discussion in the UK, doesn't matter if the people are for yes or for no, Labour or Conservatives, they all speak about the European Union as international organization. European Union is not international organization. Okay, after the Lisbon Treaty, it is a normal confederation. And that is the problem. You must be both sides. Okay. To be frank to your citizens and to openly speak about these things. And I think this is a problem.
Thank you very much. Gentleman over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Rajai Barakat. I am a former migrant, and thanks to Belgium, now I am a well-integrated European citizen. Mr. Grayling, I want to ask you this question. Do you feel yourself more American than European? Why I'm asking this question? Because if you observe during the last 30 years, many events and many issues, the positions of United Kingdom was more the voice of USA in Europe than European positions. We can see what had happened in Iraq, the war.
Okay, we get the sense of the question. Thank you.
Okay,
Next.
and don't you think that what Mr. Cameron...
Thank you. We got the sense of your question. Yes, sir.
Alain Cabu. I was many years in the city and in finance, and then treasurer of the European movement. Just a step back, I was working with the Belgian Prime Minister when Wilson came here and we wanted to help him to get into the common market. And Michael Palliser was on his side, I was on the side of the Belgian Prime Minister. And Belgium always wanted a tripod in Europe, Germany, France and England. We wanted England to be a positive element. And Wilson ended the talk by saying, we will jump on the train and we will be an extra locomotive and not an extra wagon. Unfortunately, it has been the reverse. And I think the Brexit is a lose-lose situation. Whichever is the result, Europe will be weaker and Britain as well.
Okay, I'll allow for one more, the lady over there, and then we go back to the panel. Switch your microphone.
Working. Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, my question, my reflection is about what Mr. Tarabella said about, for example, eating in a healthy way. I don't understand why that reflection should be, in your eyes, an intrusion of the European Union, knowing that you have such high rate of obesity in the UK, which leads to problems with diabetes type 2. And it is known that the UK dietary trends are not healthy. So if that comes from Europe, and as the other gentleman said, all these decisions are taken at the European level, it is not Brussels which is imposing this. So why should you find that as an intrusion? It is such an insignificant thing, but it goes towards a healthy and a health issue. So why should that bother you? What should bother you is the dietary trends in the UK, in Scotland and in Ireland, and the problems that you will face in terms of public health. That is something that should worry you, not the opposite. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. We have, since several members of the panel have to run away, I will give each of them a chance to comment on whatever they think is relevant in the last few questions, or make any other statements to conclude. Mr. Tarabella.
Very good question. It's a very good question to my colleague. He will answer in a few minutes, and I fully share the opinion of Mr. Cabou. I think that, of course, the Brexit would be a lose-lose situation. It's my last comment that I want to lose for Europe and greater lose for Great Britain.
Thank you, Mr. Grayling.
Okay, very quickly, all those points. Why is the fruit question one I should be happy that it was addressed at a European level? It is a question of sovereignty. I do not believe it. Yes, okay, we've got public health problems in the United Kingdom. We just announced a sugar tax, which is pathfinding in addressing issues of obesity. Many of us have that same problem. It is a matter for national governments and member states. It's not a matter for the European Union. And all too often, one of the things that causes concern in the United Kingdom is the sense that the solution is about more Europe, about decisions at the European level. That's the difference between us in view. I don't believe that that is a matter for the European Union to sort out. It's a matter for the British government to sort out. In terms of the Lisbon Treaty, it's true, the British do not see themselves as EU citizens. And I personally would not have signed the Lisbon Treaty. I think some of the things within the Lisbon Treaty have caused genuine issues. The Lisbon Treaty is a very broadly worded document attached to the Charter of Fundamental Rights. It gives very extensive freedom to European institutions to expand their remit into new areas. And that is one of the reasons that you see within political and governmental circles in the United Kingdom such disquiet about the direction of travel in the European Union. It's one of the concerns I have about what will happen if we move further towards that political union, because the flexibility that exists within the treaty and within the Charter give the Commission, the European Parliament and the Court the ability to do things that, in my view, mean that the United Kingdom will not be able to protect its national interest. The yellow card question, of course, do bear in mind in the orange card, the first time the yellow card was used, the Commission took 24 hours to reject it. And we have processes within the European Union that I think actually mitigate against quick decision-making and mitigate against member states being able to quickly say, no, that's not what we want, and that's based on my own personal experience. No, I don't see myself as more American than European at all. I see myself as British. I see myself as somebody who has friends and colleagues in North America and in Europe, and I want that to continue regardless of the result this summer. And in terms of the extra locomotive, the European Union today is very different to the common market that Britain signed up to in 1975, and one of the most common comments you hear from people in the United Kingdom is this is not what we signed up to.
Thank you for being comprehensive and brief at the same time. Thank you very much, Richard Corbett.
Well, some British people do also feel European. I do. And it's not either, or. You can feel both. And most younger people, I think, do. And that's why all the opinion polls show that the younger you are, the more likely you are to vote to remain, and that's a good thing. But on this issue that we've been touching on about overreach by the European Union, does it grab too much power at European level? The Union can only act on those subjects that are laid down in the treaties, ratified by every national parliament. In those treaties, there is the principle of conferral. It can only act where member states have conferred power upon it. Even when it acts, it has to respect the principle of subsidiarity. Legal obligation, backed up by the yellow card that was mentioned. Now, in the 6 years since the yellow card procedure exists, there have only been 2 occasions where the 1/3 only, by the way, a minority of 1/3 of national parliaments can say this proposal goes beyond the remit of the EU. Subsidiarity is not normally a problem. Only 2 cases in 6 years. One, the Commission immediately withdrew. The other one, you're right, Chris, it maintained it, but it was a question where the EU was acting on enhanced majority basis, so only those countries that wanted to had to join in the first place, so it shouldn't really be a problem. And finally, you mentioned the court. The court rules when... The court doesn't make law, it rules when there are disputes about the interpretation of the law. A former British president of the court said, the judges do not take political decisions, but they sometimes have to remind politicians of the decisions that they have taken. And that's true. It's a court whose members are appointed, by the way, by the member state governments, not by the European institutions. It's very different from the US Supreme Court, where it's the federal institutions that appoint the judges. Here it's the member states, so it's a safeguard for the rule of law, no more, no less. And the idea that we're on a roller coaster to a centralised superstate is just one more of those myths that are put around in Britain by the Eurosceptics. It's a balanced and democratic system, which we should be proud of.
Okay, I see no more desire for comment. I want to start by thanking the public for being here, being active and being so interested and raising concrete issues. I also want to thank the panelists for giving us a very wide picture of what is at stake and what are the different positions that will be confronted. I want to thank them for being civil and for being to the point and concrete. As one of you said in his introduction, this is only the beginning, and I think it's very important that we keep the debate alive in the interest of all Europeans, of all our citizens, and in the interest of defending the values that will stay common among us anyway. So thank you, and have a very good evening. Thank you to the panelists for coming. Hope we can do that again when it's appropriate. Good evening.